are for startups, for innovators, for really good people doing good work.
Did they give any indication of how many ICOs did not make it? Because I think that's us.
Yeah,
because I think that's a more, because I've
Yeah.
seen just a huge number of ICOs drop off, not for very obvious reasons.
Yes.
One, they were expecting free money. Two, they said they had budget, they didn't. Three,
Yes.
they just didn't have the right money spent on the right things, and they ended up just blowing it. Four, they weren't talking to syndicates, going to events, talking to whales, talking to VCs or private money. And one thing I have seen is there's a bit of a mega shift I've also seen over the last 6 months, which is crowdfunding was huge in 2017. And in 2018, I've seen it to be very, very thin on the ground.
Yeah.
And more people just kind of waiting than participating. And there's been a much bigger shift toward, larger scales of money, whether it's whales, syndicates, VCs, hedge funds, fund managers, private investors. But, we're not talking about the $500 investors. We're talking the 25,000 to 5 million, 10 million investors. So in that context, the number of ICOs you're saying passed sounds rather small when you
Yes.
think of the thousands that are out there going. And I can certainly point to about 8 or 9 that I know of just off the top of my head that didn't make it between about February and March.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
probably a huge number that just aren't showing on there. So that's even more interesting.
Yeah, well, what's great is that the people at ICO Bench are really receptive to feedback, and I will share that feedback with them. And they want to improve the reports, and I think they could look at that. As
Yeah.
you know, the one caveat is it's quite difficult to measure the lack of something, if that makes sense. So when people drop off the radar, that can be quite difficult to spot.
Well, if they don't finish their ICO and raise the funds,
yeah,
then it's pretty easy to track it.
yeah. So yeah, no, it is interesting. So
just moving on a little bit to talking about you and your company, because obviously, you want to do some shameless plugging while you're here, I guess. Who doesn't? So tell us a little bit about Famous Publicity, and actually, how did you get into PR to begin with and end up in ICO PR world? Because that's
good question.
I'd love to just understand how you've ended up in this space.
Okay, thank you. So a bit about me. Before I set up Famous Publicity, I worked for a guy called Theo Paphitis, who was on Dragon's Den. Shark Tank in the States is the equivalent program. So in the UK, it's called Dragon's Den. And he's a retail entrepreneur with 3 big brands to his name. He's also invested in property, and he's got a sports background as well in football industry. So I worked with him for 4 years, which was brilliant. And it was very much like dog years. I was actually there for 28 years, believe it or not. But seriously, it was what happened in a week is what I'd done. I used to turn down in a week what I'd want to achieve in a year in other roles. It's just crazy because it was just a role of managing all the exciting incoming inquiries, but obviously he's very busy, couldn't deal with them all. So we were turning things down all over the place. But that was a real privileged role. And I was there with somebody who was on TV and well known, and I had a fantastic time in that role, but it wasn't really the real world. Truth be known, if you hang out with anybody who's really well known, if you're with them, you go into an event and you're treated like a VIP. If you go to the same event without them, you're just a nobody. So it's actually hilarious. It's so funny. And what's funny is if you go somewhere and they think you're a nobody, and then they discover, oh yes, well actually you're with, and it's all very funny. But that's another story. The reason for saying all that is actually the real world is one of graft and business. But what was fascinating about that is that I learnt about business models. Yep. Because I would sit in meetings when Theo would have somebody come in and pitch to him with a proposition wanting investment, and he would always look at the model. And I had no idea what business models were until that point, and that was a real privilege because if he couldn't see where the money was coming from, it was never going to work. Mm-hmm. And that was fundamental. But also, he's also a good guy and believes that it's about the people. And if you have the right people with a weaker proposition, if they can execute it, you'll get better results than somebody with a fantastic proposition, but they're not necessarily the sort of people to follow through.
Yep.
So that was my that was a sort of life-changing episode for me. And prior to that, I had worked in PR for 30 years. I started off working for a women's magazine with a manual typewriter and a union that basically said on my first day of joining the business, because it was the print union, you might have heard about this in history books, but basically I couldn't be sacked, and I could, it was a job for life sort of thing. I worked as a secretary to the consumer editor on a weekly women's magazine, and they were concerned because the circulation was only about 10 million and it was about 20 million, a few years before. And needless to say, the magazine market, as we all know, all print is really in massive decline, which is unfortunate because I'm a great believer in the need of good journalism. So what was interesting is I started off there and being on the receiving end of press releases and media information. And that was, I'm showing my age here, but it was 1979 when every lunch there was a big, wonderful press conference with celebrities on every day of the week you could go to. Great fun, and no internet, no mobile phones, the whole thing. As said, in my case, not even an electric typewriter. So actually, you're probably not surprised to hear. I did confess to being a bit of a Luddite, and now you know why. But I did type with more than 2 fingers. But actually, moving on, I really love PR and communication because actually, jokes apart, I do think the media have a very important role to play because they are asking the questions that bodies, governments don't want asked. They have an extremely valuable role in informing people and giving people information. And because the media has changed so much, and to me, a good career is one where you're learning, then actually that's the best thing about working in PR, because you have to keep up and you have to be on it. You have to learn new technology. Otherwise, you're dead. Quite frankly, if I'd had the same mindset that I'd had when I first started work, I'd have no job at all. And
Right.
the same way PR, what happened is that everyone said, oh, media relations is dead because, it's all social media. And I never actually believed that. So I'm really pleased because my view is that actually it's too easy to go down the social media route. You can all earn an income from it, but you're not going to really excel or make a difference to people big time because it's a commoditized sector. And yes, you can have social media whizzes, but let's face it, social media is, it was the emperor's new clothes, for 10 years in the PR industry. My view, I've always stuck to the mainstream media relations, to the national and regional news channels, worked with news agencies, and that's the really exciting area. So what's happened is
You're talking about the kind of the PR space of getting news coverage, media coverage, being written up in the press, that kind of thing.
Exactly right. So it's mainstream national newspaper coverage for anything from services, products, people. And basically what's happened is then people brought in automated, terrible software, in my opinion, that automates responses, and I hate it. So that's the Luddite in me has saved me, because we always approach journalists one-to-one. We have a good pitch, we know what they want, and we deliver copy that they can use. And GDPR is fine for us because we never ever did mass mailings. We don't spam people. So of course, actually what's happening is that I'm really pleased that we've stuck to it, because now with a combination of global databases for media contacts, our own contacts, global media monitoring, which I wanted 20 years ago, and I was quoted such silly money, I couldn't possibly afford it, but now it's affordable. And that is the great thing. So seriously, if you want, so 20 years ago, I wanted to, and I think it was actually pretty much a paper document base, but I wanted a database of international media contacts, and I was quoted £25,000. And now you can buy that if you negotiate well, and you've been using the service for a long time, you can get it for about £5,000.
Really?
Yeah.
So the price has gone down by 80%, despite
Yeah,
the
and it's more
economy
robust.
going up over time. Yeah.
It's more robust. But the thing is with these services is they're very good, and that we use agility, which is very good. But basically, they have you have to buy it on subscription. You know, they won't let you just come in and nick all the contacts. And they've also brought in new tools which are quite good. So you could say, for example, search geographically for people who've talked about cryptocurrency in the last 2 days, and it'll pull up every media contact they've found who's talked about it. So that's very useful. And just to say, I'll give you a dem if you ever want one. So yeah, and I'll share that. So the tools are getting better. And then in terms of the results, there's big data companies. So Meltwater News is a brilliant company, and they are very good at drawing, you know, people used to use Google Alerts for monitoring the media, and it's just hopeless. So they can source results anywhere in the world, including China, which is really important if you've got work there. And you buy the service, and it's a set rate. So you get this unlimited number of results, which is very sensible, because in the old days you used to pay 200 quid for paper cuttings, which were terrible. But also there's another service we use called Yellow News, who is owned by Kantar, part of the WPP group. And basically it's the service used by all of the big political parties, all of the government departments, and it provides print and digital results globally.
Interesting.
And they present it to you and will say how much the value of the coverage is as well, if you want to know, should you have bought it in advertising, which is a bit of a moot point, as you know. But so the tools are there, and you know, again, these services are good value. Actually, they're expensive, but they're good value. Because
sorry, I was just going to ask a question about the whole kind of PR space. Have you noticed any impact or shift that's taken place because of all the social influencers that are out there now covering, for example, in the crypto space, you get coverage of crypto projects and you get multiple views of a video on a particular project rather than a single article from a single, you know, news channel that gets read and then forgotten. Have you seen any kind of impact that might have in terms of how it affects your business or enhances your business?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because what's happened is basically, and this is possibly why I'm so open to cryptocurrency, because if you look at what's happened to the media space, it's decimated. And that is a massive change. And if that change is happening so rapidly, so quickly, then you know the opposite can happen in a good way.
Yes, absolutely.
So basically, as you know, the issue of the last 10 years has been media fragmentation. So there was a time when you could, I mean, with the exception of the advertising in the middle of the Super Bowl, you know, there isn't a great deal that you can say.
With the clothing malfunctions and other, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Wasn't that funny? I love that. It's so cool. I can't arrange that this afternoon, I'm afraid. I haven't got it.
It's okay. We weren't asking. It's okay.
I wish. But anyway, but yeah, you're absolutely right. So there's complete fragmentation. And what I really like about this fundraising space and the crypto space is that there are entrepreneurs out there who are making a bit of a living out of commenting on the sector. So obviously you're looking at the YouTube influencers. Good for them. I say great stuff. You know, some of them are smashing it. I love the fact that some of them are anonymous in disguise. That just makes it even more comical. But seriously, these people have got a really good following, and video, this is the other complete truth of life. People respond to video in a more emotional way and trust it more than any other medium, full stop, except maybe face to face.
Well, of course, you know, there's a reason for that in part, because the way we learn, you know,
exactly.
Right. Well, so I mean, 70% of human beings tend to be gravitating toward visual forms of learning, and video is the easiest way for learning. And I've always found it so funny because, you know, conference calls are a nightmare for work because I'm having to sit there and listen to figure out what's going on. And I'm not saying I'm not a good listener, but I don't learn very well from having to listen to things. I like to see people and talk to them, and then I can visualize in my head what we're talking about. And that